Welcome back to Seasoned Liberally. Today we are going to be revisiting a vegetable that was probably one of the most hated in my childhood, the Brussels sprout. We're going to make a Brussels sprout salad. Raw Brussels sprouts. Trust me, it's amazing. Stick around. So today we're going to make a Brussels sprout salad. It's got only a few ingredients, but what we really want to do is just enhance the flavor of all these ingredients and just make a really simple but delicious salad. Now the Brussels sprout, when I was a young man, was a little different than it is now. In the 90s, I think it was the 90s or the early 2000s, they redesigned the Brussels sprout. They went out of their way to do some sort of horticulture testing to find out what the flavor, the off flavors were that people didn't like about Brussels sprouts. And they created, nowadays, Brussels sprouts are amazing. They're delicious, they taste great. They did not taste like this when you were a kid, if you're a little older. So that's just how it is. I mean, I know that a lot of people think our tastes change. In fact, in this case, the Brussels sprout changed. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna trim our Brussels sprouts out today, and then we're gonna shave them. We're gonna start out by trimming them out. So in order to trim them out, what I like to do is I like to look to see how damaged the outside is. So this one's got a little bit of discoloration, and it also has a discolored root down here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to nip this end off with this stem that's sort of woody and a little unappetizing. And since we're not cooking them, I actually go a little higher than I normally would. If I was cooking it, I would just get rid of it, the stem, the unappetizing piece of the stem here. But since I'm not cooking it, I'm going to get rid of all of that stem, because the stem is really very fibrous and hard and does require a little bit of heat. So I'm going to nip that off, and when I do, the Brussels sprout itself will shed those discolored layers. And what I'll have is a Brussels sprout that has no stem on it, and then has lost all of its discolored layers. And it almost always only takes one cut of the knife. Now sometimes it might take two, depending. But it normally only takes one single cut of the knife, and you can get rid of most of the unappetizing pieces, or the pieces that you don't want in your salad. Now this one looks pretty good. We're going to put it on the side. So I'm just going to actually clean up this entire bowl of Brussels sprouts. See, now this one's going to require two. You see how it's discolored here? I'm going to need to cut a little bit more so I can get this end off. And then once it comes off, there we go, looking good. All right. Another way to do this too is if you find one that looks a little grody, you nip the end off, and if they don't want to come out or follow it, you can always cut it in half. And if you cut it in half, then you can essentially just peel down exactly what you want off the Brussels sprout. And if it looks a little discolored, just get rid of it. This is a raw preparation, so we want to make sure that any discolored pieces get thrown away. And these were washed prior and then dried. So you want to give them a little rinse before you actually get started on this, because they can harbor some dirt, some grime in there. So now once your Brussels sprouts are finished, I'm going to run these through a food processor to get them shaved. But if you don't have a food processor, you can just cut them very, very thinly. And that's going to suffice. If you have a mandolin, you can use a mandolin too, but mandolin isn't great because these are tiny, and there's a possibility, even if you're holding it with just your palm, you could feasibly cut yourself because they roll. It's not great. You can use a mandolin if you want, but I'm actually going to use a food processor. The easiest way to do this is a food processor. All right, so all I have to do is turn it on, load some Brussels sprouts in here. So now all I have to do is load it up and then hit start. And it does all the work for you. And there's really no arguing with the food processor on this. The cut you want is exactly this, and it takes seconds in comparison to, you know, trying to cut this with a knife and trying to keep it even. So food processor is the way to go. So we are going to take this and we are going to put it in a colander like so. To that colander, I am going to sprinkle salt, okay? I'm going to hit it once, I'm going to toss it, and I'm going to hit it again. Okay, now I'm using Diamond kosher salt. It's not as salty as some kosher salts. If it gets too salty when you do this, that's okay. You can always rinse it off and then squeeze it dry. But what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to make sure that this vegetable gets softened down a little by the salt that's sitting on it. Brussels sprouts are a little tough, right? But and just like cabbage, I did this with the coleslaw. If you salt it ahead of time and you let it sit for a little while, and I'm going to let this sit for like an hour, hour and 15 minutes. If you do that, then you come back and it's softer, and then sometimes you can even squeeze it and get a little bit of water out of it. If you learn anything from this channel, it's that getting water out of your food, whether that's cooking it or squeezing the water out, is always going to make it taste better, okay? So we're gonna try to get the water out of here if we can. We're tossing the Brussels sprouts with that kosher salt, and it draws the moisture out. But it also, when it does that, it softens the Brussels sprout itself. So we're gonna let this sit, like I say, hour and a half, and then we're gonna come back to it. And if it does have the moisture that's ready to get squeezed, we'll give it a little squeeze, see what happens, and then we're gonna start constructing our salad. While we wait for our Brussels sprouts to soften, we are going to get some pine nuts and toast them up. So pine nuts are an essential part of this salad, and they are absolutely amazing, especially when they're toasted. So I'm going to take some of these pine nuts, put them, that's about a half a cup of pine nuts, and I'm going to put them right into the oven. Now the oven is set at 350. Here's what I want you to do. Put them in the oven, check on them in 3 minutes. They don't look brown, give them a shake. That's okay. Check on them again in another minute. Do not walk away from these. They will turn into carbon, guaranteed. They will turn faster than you could possibly imagine. You think that, oh, I got 2 minutes. 2 minutes might be too long. Set your watch for a minute after to watch it and make sure, because these will absolutely turn dark, 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 and they won't taste good. You want them to be golden. You do not want them to be black, and they will turn. It's like when you're cooking butter for a butter sauce. It goes from perfect to ruined in seconds, and so that's what you got to be careful and pay attention to this. Some people like to put this on a stove, and a dry skillet on the stove, and shake them over a skillet. Good luck to you. I've seen that work many times. I've also seen it fail a lot, because what happens is some of these don't get flipped as often, and they wind up scorching on one side. I'm not a huge fan of that. I like the oven method. Use whatever method you like best, but we need pine nuts toasted for this recipe. While we wait for our pine nuts, I'm going to start making my salad dressing. So this requires a nice size shallot for this dressing, okay? This is gonna be the main source of onion flavor in the dish, is gonna actually come from the dressing, not anything that I put inside of the salad. So I'm gonna cut the shallot in half. I'm gonna trim off the top and the bottom. And trim off the two tops, and then I'm going to peel the shallot back and dice it. Now, I am going to run an immersion blender on this. because what I want is to try to get the onion flavor as concentrated as possible. I want the shallot flavor to really penetrate the vinaigrette. You can just slice this as thin as you possibly can and get that dice as small as possible if you don't have an immersion blender. That's okay. But I'm gonna slice mine pretty thin, but I'm also still gonna use an immersion blender. So I'm gonna put my heel in my hand here, slide my knife through so I don't cut myself, right? And then I'm gonna quickly put in cuts perpendicular and then cut again. Now it looks like a lot of shallot, and it is a lot of shallot, but trust me, it's for the whole dish. In the time it took me to cut one shallot, these are done, okay? Get them out of the pan if you can, because they're gonna probably keep cooking in here, and so we're gonna get them out of the pan here and let them sit. To this bowl, I'm gonna add a nice scoop of mustard, right? That's probably 2 tablespoons worth of mustard in there. I'm using coarse ground mustard for this. Before I add my vinegar, I'm gonna hit this with some salt and with some pepper. This is gonna help distribute it pretty evenly when we whisk it together. And it's gonna help, when I add the vinegar to this, it's gonna help to dissolve that salt. So the vinegar I'm using for this, you can use lemon juice if you like. Lemon juice is perfectly fine, but I am actually gonna use apple cider vinegar. I think the apple cider vinegar really does complement the Brussels sprout really well, so that's what we're gonna use. We're gonna do a 1/2 cup. And remember, our vinaigrette recipes are 1 to 3. So a 1/2 cup to 1.5 cups. That's what it's gonna be. So 1/2 cup goes right in, okay? And to this, we're just gonna whisk it. We're gonna get a whisk and we're gonna whisk it. You'll see the mustardy color of it. The shallot is floating. Perfect. So now we're gonna get our oils ready. I almost always use a neutral oil for the base, so I'll do a whole cup of neutral oil. This is a grapeseed oil, very neutral, real nice oil. If you put in too much olive oil, it can be a little overpowering, so I'm only gonna do a 1/2 cup of olive oil. Until you get really good, always measure your vinaigrettes. It's worth it. It's worth doing. All right. So to this, while I whisk, I'm just gonna slowly drizzle in my oil, creating an emulsion. We have 2 emulsifiers in here. We have shallot and we have mustard. Both of those are great emulsifiers for a dressing. And so this dressing is gonna be really robust and it's gonna be nice, full together. It's gonna be great. So we're gonna continue just slowly drizzling in our olive oil, making sure we don't see it on the top. And as we go, it gets thicker, which is what we want. Now you don't want to add your oil too quickly because you can make it so that your emulsion breaks, and you don't want that to happen. There's a nice, beautiful dressing. So if you don't have an emulsion blender, this will work for you, but I like taking it one more step. What it's really gonna do is gonna grind down all those shallots, and so they're gonna really permeate the dressing. It's gonna get a lot of flavor from that. So I'm just gonna run my immersion blender in here. So now I'm gonna put this away. I am not going to season it right now. I just seasoned a little with the salt, but I'm not gonna season it right now. I'm gonna wait until my Brussels sprouts are ready. If they are really heavily seasoned, I won't need to put a lot of seasoning on this, but if they need some help, then I'm gonna put a little more seasoning in this. I'm gonna wait and layer the salt in later, but I don't wanna over season everything. So I'm just gonna leave it alone for right now and I'll season it later, but it's gonna sit in the fridge until those Brussels sprouts are ready to go. Okay, so it's been about an hour. We'll see if it doesn't look like there's much. Oh, there is some. We're gonna squeeze this out. You can see it. It's very hard to see. I'm gonna put this on so you can see it. Some of this is squeezing out. So we're gonna squeeze out any of the water. You can see it coming out. We're gonna get rid of this water. So that's what I'm gonna do for the next couple minutes is I'm gonna squeeze the water out of this. All right, so in my refuse bowl, you can see there was some water in there, and that's good. Getting rid of that water is gonna be good for the rest of this salad. Yeah, so getting rid of this water is gonna remove some off flavors, and we can tell that it is penetrated because the cell walls are leaking. So we can tell that salt did its job, right? So we got rid of that water, as much of the water as we could squeeze out of there. Now we gotta taste this. We gotta taste a little bit of our Brussels sprout to see how it tastes. It's perfect. It's soft, but it is not over seasoned. I used 2 nice handfuls on this. You know, you're gonna wanna watch and decide with your own salt. Your salt will have different salinities. Diamond kosher salt is gonna be different than Morton's kosher salt. So just be careful with that. If it does feel like it's a little too salty, you can always run some water over this and then squeeze it again, squeeze it out. It'll get rid of some of that salt flavor, okay? This is perfectly seasoned though. I'm actually gonna wind up seasoning my vinaigrette now. So the vinaigrette needs a little bit. As I recall earlier, it needed just a touch. So there we go, just a little bit. Give it a taste. Exactly where we wanna be. All right, so now, I'm using my hands here. You can use a pair of tongs if you want. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pour some of this in here. This is about maybe 1/3 of a cup I put in there, and I'm gonna toss it. All right. You can feel it with your hands. You can feel that it's covered. So it's coated, covered, ready to go. I'm gonna put it away for a couple minutes while I get the rest of my ingredients ready to go. It's nice to get it on there. It'll soak it in. It's perfect to dress it just a little early. So now if you're gonna dress a whole bowl of this, you're gonna wanna put on the top a nice amount of the pine nuts, give it a toss, and then hit it again, right? To that, I am also gonna take some Parmesan and I'm gonna put some shavings in here. Then when people come in and they grab some of it, they can just grab some of the shavings, some of each piece. I also have an individually plated salad here that I already put some pine nuts on. And for this, you would just take and put a couple of these pieces on here. So there's a lot of flavor layers on this salad, right? We've got the Brussels sprouts, which have their own flavor, right? They've been seasoned already. We got the richness of these pine nuts, and then there's a salt layer in both the dressing, and there's also a salt layer in the Parmesan. I'm gonna try it out, see what it tastes like. This is not the Brussels sprout you had when you were a kid. It's outstanding. So many great flavors in here. Pine nuts add so much richness, that creaminess of the Parmesan, then also another salty layer. Really just an outstanding salad. It's so simple to make, and it's really delicious. I encourage you to give this a shot. I think this is, you know, 10 ingredients, but really turns out absolutely amazing. People will ask you what you serve them. They genuinely will reach out and be like, what did you serve me? That was amazing. I hope you like this video. I hope you go down and thumb up it and then write a comment. Tell me how much you liked it. Tell me what your favorite simple salad is in the comments. Be sure to share and subscribe to the channel with the bell. Until then, I'm going to catch you next time. Season liberally.